Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Sykes. He's the founder and CEO over at Habits at Work. And this is your second time coming on the show. Andrew, I was looking forward to having you back on the show. I'm glad you're here. I'm excited to talk with you about founder-led selling. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's awesome to be back. A real compliment to be invited back a second time to your awesome podcast. Thank you for having me.
I mean, those that are listening to the podcast can probably hear him smiling, but it's like the biggest smile we've had on the podcast. We'll just make the smile like the thumbnail for the episode. I'm really excited to have you back on. I really enjoyed our last conversation, and I'm really excited about this one because it's something that I think is something I probably screwed up. It's something I see a lot of founders screw up. And we're going to talk about founder-led selling and some of the things that kind of get in their way or some of the things that kind of go wrong. And I'll lead with, I think too many founders trying to outsource or offload or hire out that early kind of first $1 million in revenue. I don't believe that is a function of sales. Some salespeople can do it, don't get me wrong, but the majority of salespeople are going to be used to operating in an environment where they're given the process, they're given this, they're given that. They're not going to be the 0 to 1 person. And I do think the best salesperson to go 0 to 1 is the founder.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Tell me why.
Well, if you think about what's happening when you're founding a business, and you may be funded, and so that's maybe a little less relevant in some businesses, but in most businesses, you're in the market before your product is even built sometimes. You may not have a track record. You may not have any customers at all. So you don't have a reference base. You can't point to what you've done before. You may not even have product market fit. So if you're ruthlessly honest with yourself, the thing that you're selling is not your great idea or your prototype or your yet to be built product or even your built product. The thing that you're selling is yourself. And convincing someone to trust you that the product you say you have, whether you do or you don't, will actually work and get the job done. And it is an enormous ask to have someone bet on you and everything that you promise will come. So until you reach $1 million or maybe well beyond that, the product you're selling is you first and your ability to deliver a solution or a product that does what you say it's going to do. And that's why I think so many founders who maybe have an engineering background or who are enamored with the idea, and like you said, I've made this mistake many, many times. I've been so excited about the product that what I want to do is spend more time tinkering with the product and less time being out there actually selling it and achieving product market fit. And maybe the biggest mistake I see is founders who maybe make a sale or two and then say, I want to go back and focus on the product, so I'll hire a head of sales. And they find their favorite Rolodex-filled head of sales who was really, really good in an environment where there was an infrastructure to support him or her. But as the second person into a company, a head of sales is usually not the greatest hire. I'm of the view that a founder should stay at the front end of sales throughout the scaling journey, but more about that in a moment.
Totally. 100% agree. It felt like when I did it, it felt too late. But I think that was just the natural pressure of it. There were so many other things to do, making sure that I was hiring the right salesperson, that they had a bit of a process, and that we were selling the right product was that first $1 million was the confirmation step coming out of the customer development. It's like, hey, did we do this right? Yes, we did this right. Okay, cool. Now we can invest in sales. And had we not got to $1 million, had we gotten somewhere halfway there and, referrals weren't happening, the customers weren't happy, you weren't seeing customer success, I felt I needed that feedback loop so I could react as quickly as possible. And I didn't want to put an additional layer of insulation, an additional layer of noise between myself and the critical feedback from the market that we needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you often hear as a founder, if you're not out there selling, is we're too expensive, or we don't have this product feature, or all of the reasons why customers will tell you they're not buying from you. And maybe they even believe it, but more often than not, they're just afraid to take the risk on this new little startup. And it's easier to say you're expensive, or you don't have this feature, or you don't have this thing. And so if you listen to that too carefully, and a salesperson may be bringing back that message to you, it might send you off on the entirely wrong track, and you run out of funding or energy or steam and never get to product market fit because you were doing what the excuse of not buying from you suggested you should do, rather than the reality of why you weren't being purchased.
If you think about the idea of believability weighted decision making, right? You look at that salesperson as a node. How much should I believe them? And I'm not saying don't trust salespeople or don't trust your salespeople, but who has more product and more customer knowledge, yourself or a salesperson you hired 3 months ago? And again, I identify as a salesperson. No slant to any salespeople listening, but the founder is going to have a greater amount of knowledge than somebody and than anybody who's been there for 3 months. It doesn't matter how good you are at a particular skill set.
Yeah.
And so do I want myself? Do I want this individual who's new, 3, 6 months, even 12 months? It's hard to build up to a similar level of, as a founder, a similar level of knowledge as a founder within even a couple of years, when, especially if the founder's been doing this for quite a while and was the person that was, frontline in all the customer development interviews.
Yeah. And even if the salesperson is a reliable conduit of this information, they may still be communicating with you through the lens of the assumption, well, we've got an engineering team who can build out product features, or we've got the cash flow funding to support a more aggressive pricing strategy. And that's seldom the case in a startup. So I think there is no substitute for, as a founder, being the key salesperson. Yes, hire some sales support if necessary, and hire salespeople. But as a sales leader, I think if the founder's not in that position, it's a very dangerous prospect for a company.
Totally. Before they evolve into a sales leader, they need to evolve into a salesperson. And so let's start there. What does it take to get somebody to go from product or technical into stepping into that role? Because I think that's the one of the biggest things that I hear from founders that don't come from a sales background is, I'm not going to be a very good salesperson.
Yeah. And I think they're right, because engineering is a set of skills, product development is a set of skills, and selling is a set of skills, and they're not the same skills. So there are very few technically or product-minded founders who are good at selling for all the right reasons. And so what I think it takes is a few realizations and then a lot of hard work. And the realizations are, you are always going to be the most excited person about your product. And excitement doesn't equal sales. Does it help? Absolutely. I mean, if you're not excited about your product, don't expect other people to be. But you seldom sell on excitement alone. So it's the mindset shift that while I may think this is the greatest idea ever, so much so that I bet my entire career on it, other people are going to see it just like they see any other product, which is, that's nice, I'll consider it. And unless it is materially better than what I've got already or no solution, then I'll be a pass. And so the realization is product isn't it. The real question is, can I, through the skills that I deploy and practice, have someone believe me? And I know that sounds like a ridiculously simple thing, but I believe there is a rule in life that talks about how we gain knowledge as human beings and is really relevant for the art of selling, which is that first we decide whom to trust, and that determines what we believe as humans about climate change and politics and religion and all the things you believe. If you're really honest and you ask yourself, why do I believe what I believe? The answer is, I first decided who to trust, and then I believe that journalist, scientist, author, you name it, parents. And the same is true in sales. Customers decide that they want to buy from you / trust you before they decide if or what they want to buy from your company. And so the question is, do you have the skills to have someone trust in you, knowing that you are, in a very real sense, not to be trusted, because you're fresh out of founding your business. You don't have a trustworthy track record. You don't have the social proof of references from other customers. You don't have the trusted brand in the market. So there are lots of reasons for rational human beings not to trust you and your company.
I agree. And I want to add one thing, because I do think it's important that if any founders are out there listening and they come from a non-technical background, the one thing that you do have going for you is a deep understanding of the problem space. And I think that is one of the biggest things that a founder can do. It doesn't matter what your sales skills are. Obviously, the things we're going to talk about will make you better. But if you have a deep understanding and an empathy of a deep understanding of the problem space and an empathy for the user, you are miles ahead of most salespeople, even if you don't know all the basic sales tactics.
Absolutely. Now, I'll say that's a double-edged sword, because as you've seen in your career, I'm sure there are many very clever salespeople who know a lot about their product and sometimes know too much about their product and just talk and talk and talk instead of listen. But we do a really interesting experiment in the class on entrepreneurial selling that I teach at the Kellogg School of Management. We put up the word entrepreneur and have people do a word association with it. And then we put up the word sales and have people do word association. And you can imagine the results. Sales are like slimy, untrustworthy, secondhand car salesman, self-motivated, etc. And entrepreneur is innovative, driven, intelligent, passionate, all those things. So there's a lot going for you as an entrepreneur by identifying yourself to your prospects as an entrepreneur. And it's certainly a more trustworthy look than I'm the head of sales, or that wonderful euphemistic lie, I'm the head of business development.
Oh, yeah. I was a sales manager 15 years ago. And they're like, oh, how many people on your team? And I was like, 1.5.
Yeah.
You're
looking at both the 1.5.
Wait, is that a fat joke? Yeah. And so as founders are stepping into the sales role, what are some things they need to take on, or what are some things they need to do in order to kind of step in there?
Yeah. Well, the first temptation to avoid, I think, is selling to your close network. Because although it's easy to call up friends and family and 1 degree remove connections, sometimes those people will buy from you once as a favor to you, or they'll buy and give you feedback because they love you. And there is no substitute for getting out there and attempting to sell to complete strangers who have no connection to you, because I think that is the fast path to product market fit testing and development. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I think is getting really, really clear, that this is not a friends and family business. This is a real business, and a real business sells to people who have never heard of you, who don't know who you are, and won't give you the time of day unless you're extraordinary as a human and have a phenomenal product behind you. And then the second thing has to do with, I think, being humble enough to know that even though you may be the smartest person in the room, have depth of knowledge into the problem like no one else in your industry, it still matters that you out-listen everyone else in order to outsell them. Because in the end, I think no one is open to listening to you and your smart idea until we've had the privilege and the joy of getting off our own chests what we think the solution should be, even if it's malformed and a terrible idea. I've never met a customer who's open to buying until they've expressed to me their view of how it should be done. So there are some real watch outs for entrepreneurs who are super excited and just want to tell everyone about their amazing product. Like rule 1, use your eyes, the instruments we're given to listen, in addition to our ears. And of course, make sure that you're talking to people who will be real, ruthless providers of feedback. There's that chasm of adoption that we know between early adopters who will buy anything because they just want to take it apart or be the first to try it out, and the mass market who are on the other side of things, whose response to your marketing and sales messages will be very, very different. So it's also realizing that what you say to sell your first $1 million may no longer work beyond $1 million, and that you have to keep evolving your message and your approach as your business scales, even if your product isn't changing.
Totally. Well, because your market's going to be changing as you go from, I think it's the innovators are like the very tip of the spear, and then you've got early adopters, early majority. The language you're going to use to them is naturally going to evolve. And yeah, I love your point is well taken about not selling to friends and family. I do think I'm not going to go ask my mom for this. She's not going to buy sales development or consulting. That's not a thing. But I think the early network, one of the powerful things you could do if you're like, well, who do I go sell to and I don't know anybody, is to ask for referrals. And referrals kind of gets you that 1 degree removed, and you keep asking for referrals after every single conversation. Hey, who else do you know? Just like this podcast, the only way we keep great guests and the quality so high is I ask everybody, and I'm going to ask Andrew again at the end, hey, who should I have on next? Yeah. And that gives me an amazing selection of great guests. And I think you could do the same for your early sales and finding those early customers.
Yeah. And, I love the subject of referrals because for many years, dare I say decades, I believe the common sense view that the time to ask for a referral is when your promise has been delivered. You buy my product and then you wait 6 months and it works or it doesn't work. And if it works, then I say, Colin, can I have a referral? And what I now know to be true is the moment to ask for a referral is the day your deal closes. Because the harsh reality is that is likely the happiest day in your customer's life with you. Because that's the day that they've bought your promise of what's going to happen. It's the day before reality kicks in, and it's seldom the case that a promise of a product outcome is exactly matched. So ask for it early where someone has told themselves, I trust you and I believe your promise. Why wouldn't they refer you if they were confident to buy from you themselves? And anyway, it just buys you 6 months of missed opportunity if you ask for referrals when the proof is there versus when the person has made the choice to buy from you. Does that make sense?
Totally. 100%. Yeah. As we kind of progress from that $1 million, where does the founder go after you've closed that first $1 million? Do they get to disappear in the background, go back play the product, or are they still involved in sales, still involved in the team?
Well, I have a point of view on this, and I'm quite happy to say that I may be wrong on this because there are many founders who have built these amazing unicorns who never go near the sales team again. But for most businesses that I've seen that aren't in the unicorn status, I'm of the view that the founder should never give up the position of leading the sales team. That doesn't mean they have to be the functional CRO or head of sales, but I do believe that the moment a founder is no longer in regular communication with customers, bad things are likely to start happening because they just give up the opportunity to really have the ear to the ground, hear what customers are actually saying versus what's filtered through 2 or 3 layers of people before it gets to them. So as distasteful as it might be, I think rule number 1, at least for my businesses and the businesses I advise, is if you're a founder, you're signing up for being in the sales mix for the rest of your life. And what a joy to do that anyway. We all talk about building products for customers and being customer-centric businesses. Really? Show me that you mean it by being in the mess with the sales team.
Mm-hmm. And they are the front lines. Unless you're doing regular customer development interviews, which, I try to do once a year. And I think that's a rarity. If anybody's listening and they do regular customer development interviews with their existing customers and customers in the market, I'd love to hear from you. I don't know too many other businesses that are doing that on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful thing to do. I do think it potentially suffers from the biases that come with focus group style interviews, which is customers will tell you that the product they really want is the one you got right now, a little cheaper, a little easier to implement, and maybe with 3 features that you don't have. And that's often a dangerous set of feedback to attend to. I like to say there is nothing more precise than the feedback of this customer bought or they didn't buy. Mm-hmm. That's ruthlessly clean.
100% agree. When I do customer development, I'll talk to our existing customers, and it's usually problem-based around, what problems are they experiencing? And I'm looking for adjacent problem space, but I'll also go and find profiles of people outside of our customer base and then ask them the same questions, basically a set of context questions. And then it builds towards a magic question. Hey, if I could solve any problem for you related to sales, what would that be? How important is that to you? How satisfied are you with it? And I find that kind of keeps our services well calibrated to, what the market needs, because it's very easy for the market to shift and for us not to notice that. And so I like to kind of keep my head up.
I like that approach.
As a founder, as you're going from, that sales leadership role, what are some key pieces that you see founders needing to learn as they step from individual contributor to sales leader?
Yeah, well, we've spoken about the first one, which is, I think, going from being the product development, engineering, company starting person to being ruthlessly good at the skills and habits of being a salesperson. And then I think the shift in skills becomes, how do I build a company that makes high-performing habits and skills, especially sales skills, the easy default for my team rather than the difficult choice? And, there's so much misunderstanding when it comes to culture and skills and habits. My favorite thing to say is human beings don't actually have habits. Habits have human beings. And what I mean by that is, if you think about, you go into a library, you're quiet and respectful. And then an hour later, you go into the bar and we're yelling at each other and telling stories and having a great time. Are we irrational human beings who are just erratic in our behavior? No, of course not. We behave based on the context in which we find ourselves. So the question for a leader for me is, can you design the contexts of your business like a library or a bar so that people walk in the morning and the easy thing for them to do are the set of skills and habits that produce results, and the difficult thing for them to do are the things that are sort of designed out of your environment. I mean, as we were starting the show, we both turned off our cell phones knowing that we're both, notification addicts. And unless we do something very deliberate, the easy default would have been for us to both look at our phones or our Slack. And I think leaders have an enormous opportunity to design their companies to make it easy to be a high performer. But we don't often think about company design as a habit creating skill. We think of it as like a beautiful office space and a great environment. That's true, but does that environment encode for the right skills and habits?
I remember somebody early on telling me that I think I was a year into it, and they're like, yeah, your company in a year or two is going to look and feel just like you in the best and worst way possible. Right. And I was like, oh no. Because people pick up your habits. People take their cues from you. It's the founder, it's the leader that sets the culture. And those are your habits, the things that you do automatically. And your company is called Habits at Work, and we'll kind of get to the work that you do a little bit later. But I'd love to understand the sort of, what do you think are some of the more important habits that founders need to take on in the sales leadership role? Yeah.
We've looked at and have spent a couple of decades researching this question: which habits make the biggest difference to your performance in life in general, and in particular in the world of sales at work? And a lot of them people write off as soft skills, and we think of them as power habits. So just a couple of them is, number one, the ability to listen with empathy, which is a very different skill from active listening, making a show of and nodding along that you're listening. Listening with empathy is allowing yourself to feel what someone else feels so you can recreate the experience that they're having for them, leaving them feeling seen rather than heard, understood rather than just, nodded along to, and connected with you. It's based on the truth of this statement. We quite literally fall in love with great listeners. So if you want people to follow you up that mountain as a leader or take a risk on you as a customer, listening is the super skill. There are corollaries to that or matching habits. The habit of asking questions that unlocks greatness in other people. And again, we tend to think of questions as just something we do to get an answer. And of course they are. But questions are like a Swiss Army knife. There are questions that help us connect with humans. There are questions that help people change their perspective. There are questions that make it easier for people to focus on next steps. There are questions that signal that we're listening. So it's getting really good at understanding what role questions play beyond simply getting an answer. And why does that matter? In sales, amateurs who ask a lot of questions end up leaving customers feeling like they're in an interrogation. Professionals who know how to choreograph questions and listening end up with customers who say things like, "This felt like therapy. It was awesome. We had a wonderful conversation." And, if you think about a conversation, that the third habit I'm very strong on is the habit of telling stories to change minds. Because I don't know about you, but I've never met another human being who likes being told what to do, especially by a salesperson. But it is our job to tell customers what to do. So how do you do that without having them react and want to do exactly the opposite just to spite you? And of course, stories is the way to change a human mind by allowing them to see for themselves what's possible versus telling them what to do. So there are others, and I would say that those three are, for me, the most important three skills, because most of the compound moves we learn in sales systems are combinations of that. Handling an objection is listen first, ask some questions, tell a story, maybe with some connective tissue. Competitive differentiation is about listening to what a customer really needs, asking some questions to either shift their perspective or deepen your knowledge, and then tell a story that positions your company in the right way. So there are lots of compound, wonderful sales skills that if you break them down, the Lego blocks of them are these simple but profound power habits. Last but not least, I'd say the most important habit is the habit of creating a trustworthy first impression. And that requires the mental gymnastics for getting over the reality that as a salesperson, you are in the category of the least trustworthy profession on the planet. And if you are not okay with that, like, get out of sales. And if you are okay with that, you realize job number one is I need to demonstrate I'm a human being rather than I'm a salesperson. Now, are you both? Of course, but no one wants to work with a salesperson. Everyone wants to hang out with a magnetic, interesting, wonderful human being. So how do you do that in the milliseconds to minutes when you first meet someone?
Tell me more.
Well, of course, how you do it is you recognize that people will judge you before you even open your mouth. So how do you design your visual appearance? Recognize that people will dismiss you if your small talk is uninteresting. How's the weather? And, I see that you've got your kids' pictures there. And I read on LinkedIn that you're from this school. It's pretty vanilla. I think small talk is an opportunity for big connections if you have the courage to ask people more interesting connection questions than how are you and how's your day and how's the weather. Is it personal and intrusive? Absolutely. Is it a risk? Undoubtedly. Does it have massive payoffs for connection? If I said, like, Colin, I know we've just met, but I've just finished reading this amazing book. May I ask you, what's your favorite book that impacted your life? And the reason this works so well is because we're surfacing the truth that behind our skins and colors and genders and backgrounds, we're pretty much the same human being. So can I identify through my connection questions those things that we have in common? Because it doesn't take terribly much for me to say, oh, you've got a favorite book? I've got a favorite book. Even if they're different favorite books, we know we've got something in common now. And my favorite part of the first impression is just simply how you introduce yourself when someone inevitably says, let's start with introductions. And most salespeople say something like, My name is Andrew. I'm the something of sales. Subtext, I'm in the least trustworthy profession. And I'm so happy to be here and talk to you about my product. And everyone's like, uh-oh, here it comes, protect yourself. Versus just sharing a little bit about why you do what you do to demonstrate that you have a non-financial motive for why you're showing up in this room. So I have a structure for introducing yourself that I think really attends to the three questions people are asking when they meet you, which is, can I believe you? Can you do it? And have you done it before? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Could you give me an example? Introduce yourself, just so everybody can hear.
Yeah.
How that.
Let's say I've had the privilege of working for multiple companies over 2 decades in amazing industries in healthcare, finance, and technology. But about 5 years ago, I realized that none of that matters if I couldn't figure out how to build trust and connection with the people that I serve. And so today I have the privilege of helping amazing salespeople around the world become extraordinary at the beautiful art of building trust. So it's explaining like what I did, what I realized that drives me today, so that instead of people assuming, oh, Andrew, you're here to sell me something I can't afford on a time frame that's uncomfortable for a commission that'll make you very rich, but me very disadvantaged. Instead, I'm revealing like why I do what I do, what I'm passionate about. Because I've had the privilege of meeting thousands of salespeople who I would tell you are wonderful human beings, unfairly painted with this brush of you're not trustworthy because they have what some people call commission breath, this assumption that you're in it for the money. And are we to blame for doing that? As sales leaders, paying commission to salespeople has made the world clear that salespeople get paid on sales. As a result, we trust nurses who get paid a salary and doctors who get paid a handsome salary, a lot more than we trust salespeople, because salespeople get paid for the sale, not for helping us. At least that's the assumption. So you have to break that assumption, because the truth is you walk into a prospect meeting and they are assuming that you're either going to lie to them, have bad intentions, or make promises that you can't keep. And unless you can break that mold, you will suffer the fate that many people suffer in sales, that they've come to believe to be true, but is actually a myth, which is trust takes time to build. Because none of the research supports that. It is a milliseconds to minutes phenomenon. But what does take months to build what does take months to do is climb out of a trust hole that you didn't know you stepped in or you didn't know you were put into. And that all happens in the first couple of minutes. And just think about how many sales systems spend even a moment, let alone most of the time, on the first 3 minutes of a meeting. It's all like pitch and close and handling objections and setting ambitious goals, all wonderful stuff. But in my view, none of it matters if you haven't solved problem one, which is having someone trust you as a human being.
Totally. I would parry that, and I would also say none of this matters unless you can teach it to the rest of your organization. Absolutely. It's one thing for the founder to be able to do this. It's another thing for you to scale this up and build these habits into the company. So how do you think about designing these habits or building these habits into the company, so it's not just me, it's not just James, it's not just Andrew that does this, it's everybody who does this?
It's a harder problem than you might think. And one of the experiences I've had that has left me shaking my head is many conversations with chief revenue officers where I say, do you fundamentally trust salespeople? And they say, well, no, because we all have that opinion. Do you think your sales team is trusted by your customers? Yeah, my team is. Why? They're just like every other salesperson. There's nothing unique about your salespeople versus everyone else. So what I advise is the humility to understand that we come from a profession with a bad reputation. Deserved or not, earned by me or not, I'm in that category. So how do you solve that as a company? I think the opportunity is not just to teach people the skills of trust building and actually being worthy of trust, having integrity, telling the truth, having good intentions, and making responsible promises. I think there's a higher goal, which is choosing to be the most trustworthy business in your industry. Because if you think about it, like in every industry, there is a fastest, a cheapest, an oldest, a most innovative, like all of these competitive mountaintops are owned by some company. But look around in your industry and ask yourself, which company owns the most trustworthy competitive mountaintop? And in my view, there are few industries where anyone occupies that territory. So why wouldn't you, if you believe what I believe, which is you can earn a premium above the market average for your product, even if your product is not better than the average, for the value that customers will pay for a beautiful experience with a trusted salesperson. Or said differently, like as a buyer, I'm happy to pay a premium to know that I'm working with someone I trust, whose promises I can count on, because a purchase decision is a risky thing to do. And if you can de-risk it for me by letting me feel like I trust you almost enough to leave my kids with you, I'll pay a premium for that all day long, over and above what I'm buying when I buy your product itself.
Of course, because the cost of the product, the cost of the service is rarely the greatest cost in the total equation.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely. Even look at Salesforce, is expensive as hell, but you're going to spend more implementing it. You're going to spend more on time training your people, just in their raw costs. You're going to spend more time customizing it and making it work for your organization.
Yeah. It's not, of course, trust is like near and dear to my heart, but if you think about most business problems, and certainly this is true in sales teams, if you interview a sales leader and you say, like, what really is the problem? And you keep digging, at the bottom of the problem, you're always going to get to one of two answers. I got a group of people who are doing the wrong thing repetitively over time, and I need them to stop. Or I got a group of people and they're not doing the right things or the right things enough, and I need them to start or increase it. Or said differently, like almost every business problem, and especially sales problems, are habit creation or habit extinction problems. So as a sales leader and as a business leader, I'm of the view that the essential leadership skill is the ability to design the context of your business to make the habits of high performance the easy default.
And how do you do that?
You realize that human beings don't have habits. Habits have human beings. So like you design a library that makes it easy to be quiet, you think about the physical spaces, home offices and workplaces, the systems under which people operate and the tools they have to do it, the people with which they work, including and especially their managers and their leadership, and the mindsets that people adopt. Those are the four contexts that humans are always surrounded by. What I think, what other people do, the spaces in which we do it, and the rules that are operating in this space. Those contexts are like the water to a fish in a fishbowl. They determine how that fish swims, eats, breathes, and dies. In the same way it determines how employees behave and act consistently over time. So rather than assuming like I've got problem employees that are either lazy or uneducated and so I should incentivize them or train them, I think about how are the contexts that surround people designed so that when I leave the room, they'll still do what I want them to do because they're being quiet in the library, or they're being boisterous in a bar, or they're making calls on my sales floor if that's what I want them to do.
Mm-hmm. I love the context or the additional context around, because you could look at a sales rep or a sales team or a sales function and say, oh, we have a problem here. And the problem is with the people. And the symptom of the problem might come from the people, might be coming from missed quotas. But then when you unpack that, you could look at, there's higher level problems, like is the market there, right? Has there been a market change, or lower level problems? Does the salesperson have the skills? Do you have the right process? Have they been trained effectively? Are they just having a bad month? right? It's never just a case of binary good salesperson, bad salesperson, and good salesperson can suddenly flip to bad salesperson. That is a symptom, and that can be the way that the disease is presenting. Yeah. But it is very rarely that somebody who's been a good, consistent salesperson suddenly flips and now is a terrible salesperson.
Yeah,
they might present that way, but that's rarely the actual issue.
That's very insightful. It's sort of part of this whole approach we have to treating symptoms rather than causes in our healthcare system. It translates into how we deal with sales teams too. And you're right. Like, one of the things that I am very passionate about is dismissing this myth that salespeople aren't already highly motivated. And so messing around with their compensation is usually just a recipe for destroying motivation. Now, do you want to have a well-designed compensation system? Absolutely. Does a commission-based system make sense? Yes, and has some side effects that you have to be careful about. But I think most human beings are highly motivated to do a good job, but they get worn down by an environment that makes it hard to do so. And they often lose motivation because of the struggle every day to overcome contexts that make it difficult to be a great performer.
Strongly agree. I wanted to end with one last question, and we kind of touched on it at the beginning. We've been talking about kind of building habits, and one of the habits that I have that I don't think I haven't seen many other my founder friends replicate is continuing to be in touch with the customer, not just working with customers, but also doing customer development. And I've heard you say the customer or the founder needs to be the customer champion. Tell me more about that, and let's land the episode here.
Yeah. Well, I think there are so many benefits to that. Number one, you're hearing probably sooner than anyone else would hear when there's a shift in customer expectations or a shift in the market that otherwise might take a year or two to get to you through the filter of the sales team and the product team. The second thing is, I've never found a customer who doesn't appreciate a visit from a founder from time to time. So there is longevity and relationship benefits that come from it. I also think that the sales team are thrilled to have the founder show up every now and then in one of their meetings. And dare I say, maybe keeps them on their toes. So I think there are a lot of benefits to just keeping your ear to the ground. That doesn't mean you have to be in 8 sales meetings a day. But I think the founder who hasn't spoken to their customers other than at some function in a year or two is in a very precarious, dangerous position versus the one who, as a discipline, as a habit, has 1 or 2 customer meetings a week, 1 or 2 prospect meetings a week. There's nothing like speaking to customers to keep you sharp and focused.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Doing the right things is rarely about willpower or desire. It's about the actual follow through, and being good at sales is about doing 1,000 things really, really well. 1,000 unimportant things consistently well. And I think staying in touch with customers and staying on top of, what are their needs is probably one of the best habits you can get into. Andrew, I always love having you on the show. Talk to me a little bit more about habits at work. I mean, that's what we've been talking about today, but how is it that you help people, you help companies develop their habits?
Well, thank you for asking me. Habits at work is a reaction to the truth that most training, including sales training, even when it's done well and even when people love the experience, suffers from that forgetting curve, and so is quickly forgotten and seldom implemented. And I think a lot of money is spent and wasted on training that doesn't take you from knowledge acquisition through skill development all the way into habit activation. So we exist to help companies turn knowledge into skills that become habits. We do it for individuals, for small companies, and for some of the world's biggest companies. And our methodology, we call it promise selling, is asking the question at every stage, from pre-contact to the end of the life cycle, what is the most trustworthy move you can make? Realizing that we all walk through life as a literal walking promise. And what is the promise that you're making every time you open your mouth, every meeting you have, every interaction you have? What does it mean to be a phenomenal seller of promises that other people can count on?
Love that. If people are trying to get in touch, they want to learn more about promise selling, what's the best way for them to find you?
our website, habitsatwork.com, habitsatwork.com. People are welcome to email me as well. As a salesperson, I love a good personal contact. My email is andrew@habitsatwork.com. And I'm on social media a lot on LinkedIn. I'd be privileged to connect with any of your listeners on LinkedIn. Also, Andrew Sykes at Habits at Work is an easy way to find me on LinkedIn. Thank you for asking.
Right on. I'll throw a link to the website and to your LinkedIn in the show notes. So if anybody's curious, you can have a look down there wherever your podcast may be hosted. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the show. Again, it's always a pleasure.
You mentioned my smile, and I'm leaving with sore cheeks from smiling at the privilege of speaking to you again. Thank you, my friend.
Right on. Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you all next week.